Do you have to heat beeswax and castor oil separately?
On my other video, I had showed that if you were using castor oil and beeswax, that you had to heat them up in separate pans and then combine them together. But I was questioned, well, what will happen if you go ahead and just mix the two together to begin with? So that is what we are going to find out today.
So what happens if you melt the castor oil and the beeswax together instead of separately?
Okay, I'm going to use my standard ratio of 5 tablespoons of oil to 1 tablespoon of beeswax. So I've got 1, okay, 5. Okay, now I'm going to use 1 tablespoon of beeswax. Now, I've said before in many of my videos, I like to use the pastels because they're so much easier to measure and to melt. So let's just put that in there and let's see what happens. And it would certainly be much quicker to just combine the two than to mess up 2 separate dishes, one to heat the beeswax and one to heat the castor oil. And I had just blindly followed the directions that I was given, telling me you had to heat them up separately. So let's see what happens. Okay, now I have let this, I'm going to let this cool off a minute. It looks like they both melded together just fine. I'm going to add just a little bit of vitamin E. Mix these together. And we'll just let this set a minute to see how it turns out. Now the second question would be, now I know in my previous recipe it was on making the menthol salve where you use the menthol crystals, and maybe that was the difference why you couldn't do them together. But I'm going to, let's try now melting the beeswax first and then adding the castor oil to it. And let's see what happens. Putting in my tablespoon of beeswax. And we're going to let that melt first before we add our castor oil. Okay. Now my beeswax is just about melted. And now I'm going to add the 5 tablespoons of castor oil and let's see what happens. Okay. Well, if you want to look at it, it's kind of congealing right now, but let's just keep on melting. Just watching it, it looks like it's coming all together. Although the issue could have been the temperature, because when you're using the menthol crystals, you're wanting to keep the temperature at a certain temperature. So let's see, when I get this all melted together, what temperature it is.
Now the temperature for the menthol crystals need to be around 112 degrees Fahrenheit. Now this temperature, when I get all of this melted back together, is 122 degrees Fahrenheit.
A little vitamin E to this. Stir that up together. Now as far as looking at these, I mean, I just really can't tell a difference than when I make it the other way. Now when you make when you combine beeswax with castor oil, you would have what you would consider a non-petroleum jelly. Or that's why we were making the menthol salve, because we were trying to make it like a Vicks menthol salve. Now when you get it to this creamy consistency, if you wanted to whip it and make it more like a petroleum jelly, you could certainly do that, although I wouldn't want to have to wash the additional dishes to do this. So we'll come back in a little bit and let these solidify and see how they feel. Okay, now of course I've made these both ways. The consistency, you know, let's look at that. the consistency, you know, it does kind of look like a petroleum jelly. Of course, like I said before, you could have whipped that to give it a little more volume and make it a little smoother. But remember, when you're whipping air into something, that is going to reduce the shelf life. And both of them seem to be about the same. So, if you're just going to make a normal salve out of beeswax and castor oil, it's going to be great just to add the beeswax and the castor oil together. And if you're just using essential oils, all that is going to work great together. Now the only problem is if you want to use the menthol crystals, because you want to keep the temperature around 112, and you're just going to have more control over that if you're doing it separate.
And you might be an herbalist if you're making your own non-petroleum jelly with castor oil and beeswax. Share, like, and subscribe so you don't miss any of these great recipes and remedies.